from the Chief Officer of Diversity at Fordham University, as well as the Deans of Fordham University. And thank you all for being here. I'm going to start with just brief presentations of each of our speakers and the order in which they will be speaking. And then each of the speakers will give about a 5-minute kind of position piece. Then the speakers will kind of reflect and ask questions to each other. And then we will be moving to questions from, particularly from the students, but from everyone else who's participating in the event today. And thank you for coming. We have a fantastic crowd. I think we're going to have upward almost 300 participants today. So the title of our talk today is Representations of Anti-Blackness and White Supremacy in Languages. And we have 4 distinguished speakers who are joining us today. 3 from America and 1 from 3 participating from America and 1 from France. And a great apology that the time change in France happened this past week, and it doesn't happen until next week in the United States. So the normal 6 hours is not in place. So I apologize to Isabel for inconveniencing. So our first speaker today will be Alison Blakely. Alison Blakely is Professor Emeritus of Modern European and Comparative History at Boston University. He's the author of Blacks in the Dutch World, The Evolution of Racial Imagery in the Modern Society by Indiana University Press in 1994. Russia and the Negro, Blacks in Russian History and Thought, Howard University Press, 1986, which was a winner of the American Book Award in 1998. Several articles on Russian populism, including Contested Blackness in Red Russia, published in the Russian Review in 2016, and on various aspects, on various European aspects on the Black diaspora. His interest in comparative history has centered on populism, the history of democracy, and on the historical evolution of color prejudice. His current project is an overview of the history of Blacks in modern Europe. He is the recipient of numerous honors, prizes, and awards, including the Woodrow Wilson, Mellon, Fulbright Hayes, and Ford Foundation Fellowships. He was also honored by the appointment as a visiting professor at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. He is a former president of Phi Beta Kappa, serves as on the editorial board of its journal, The American Scholar, and in 2010 was appointed by President Barack Obama to a 6-year term on the National Council for the Humanities. Our second speaker will be Isabelle Bonny-Claverie. Isabelle Bonny-Claverie was born in the Ivory Coast, but raised primarily in Paris. She's the granddaughter of the French magistrate Alphonse Bonny, former Chief Justice of the Ivory Coast. She graduated from the Sorbonne University in Modern Literature and Art History and received a degree in screenwriting from the Parisian film school La Femis. Author, screenwriter, filmmaker, and blogger, Bonny-Claverie desires to recount the stories of those who remain underrepresented and encourages us to question our relationship to difference and to plurality. She Sorry, someone muted me. She was the author at 17 years old of La Grande Dévoreuse, Ville d'Exil, Édition Le Monde, La Découverte in 2000. And she is a columnist for the Huffington Post and Nouvel Observateur, where she writes on Blackness in France, diversity and inclusion, and is writer-director of multiple films. In 2015, she wrote and directed the documentary film Trop Noire pour être Française, Too Black to be French, a film that we teach every semester in our French 2600 course. She has published this as a book with Talendier in 2017, and it has been recently translated into English by our colleague Joshua Jordan. Her internationally acclaimed documentary has been compared to a modern day account of Fanon's Black Skin, White Mask. She has won numerous awards for her artistic interventions, including the Jury Award of the Festival of Provence, Terre de Cinéma, People's Award of the Amiens House of Arrest, Feminine Interpretation Award at the International Short Film Festival of Abidjan, and special mention at the Festival du Cinéma Africain d'Asie et d'Amérique latine, and special mention by Cygnus Ecumenic Award for her short film Pour la Nuit, or For the Night, 2004. Our third speaker will be Avishai Yeganyahu Mekonnen. Avishai Mekonnen is an Ethiopian Jewish filmmaker and photographer whose work includes the award-winning documentary video Flower, screened widely at international film festivals and broadcast prime time on Israel's Premier Network. He has directed and written Generations of a Family, Anchor, and Hot House. He also produced the internationally acclaimed documentary Menelik, was the assistant director of Caravan 841, and held the lead role in Laya Biadis. He has done extensive work on dramatic, documentary, and news programs in Israel and America. His most recent work includes 400 Miles to Freedom, which documents Avishai Mekonnen's perilous journey from Ethiopia to Israel during Operation Moses in 1984, when the Israeli government secretly moved 8,000 Ethiopian Jews to Israel under a veil of complete secrecy, and 7 Generations, a photography video project focusing on an Ethiopian oral history custom while examining the relationships between the elder and younger generations of Ethiopian Jews in Israel. His current project is a new movie called Heroes, which is the story of Ethiopian Jewish heroes who risked their lives to help lead their community to the Holy Land. In addition to the multiple awards for his films and their representation at film festivals around the world, he is the recipient of the 6 Point Fellowships, a partnership of J-Dub Records, Abuda Arts, and the Foundation for Jewish Culture. Our final speaker will be Tanya Hernandez. Tanya Kateri Hernandez is the Archibald R. Murray Professor of Law at Fordham University School of Law, where she teaches anti-discrimination law, comparative employment discrimination, critical race theory, the science of implicit bias and the law. She received her BA from Brown University and her JD from Yale Law School, where she served as Note Topics Editor of the Yale Law Journal. Professor Hernandez is an internationally recognized comparative race law expert and Fulbright scholar who has visited at the University Paris-Ouest Nanterre, La Défense, and the University of the West Indies Law School in Trinidad. She has previously served as a Law and Public Policy Affairs Fellow at Princeton University, a faculty fellow at the Institute for Research on Women at Rutgers University, a faculty fellow at the Fred T. Korematsu Center for Law and Equality, and as a scholar in residence at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Professor Hernandez's scholarly interest is in the study of comparative race relations and anti-discrimination law, and her work in that area has been published in numerous university law reviews like Cornell, Harvard, NYU, UC Berkeley, Yale, and in news outlets like the New York Times. She's the author of Racial Subordination in Latin America, the Role of the State, Customary Law, and the New Civil Rights Response, Brill Research Perspectives in Comparative Law, Racial Discrimination and Multiracials and Civil Rights, Mixed Race Stories of Discrimination, and the forthcoming on Latino Anti-Black Bias, Racial Innocence, and the Struggle for Equality. We are extremely honored to have these guests with us today, and I'm going to turn the spotlight over to Alison Blakely. Alison, you can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Professor Clark, and good afternoon to everyone. I've decided that my main contribution today should be to provide a bit of historical context on anti-Blackness and white supremacy in European languages. I'd like to begin by pointing out that the related terms used in the languages can best be understood as a reflection of the history of Europe. And the difference between anti-Blackness in Europe and the United States results from differences in their histories. In the case of the United States, the most crucial historical experience is the inherent contradiction in its being a democracy founded as a slave society. As a result, within its next century, it suffered a related bloody civil war that has yet to be recovered from. Of all the Western societies, the United States is the only one to practice slavery at home. The others restricted it to their colonies. Emancipation here presented the problem of how to continue to dominate the former slaves and their descendants. And race and color have been the replacement for chains. The European societies were traditionally structured on social classes, which provided a degree of control so confident that they've been able to tolerate, for example, wealthy or talented Blacks from America enjoying the privileges of European upper classes. This is what allowed African Americans to enjoy fine hotels and other accommodations denied them at home during the era of segregation. So we've never been able to stop talking about race and color here, which has generated related vocabulary far too voluminous to cover in our short session today. For European societies, the most traumatic relevant historical experience was the more recent Holocaust, an emotional experience they still have not recovered from. This remains such a raw wound that until a few years ago, it was even against the law to publish Hitler's book Mein Kampf in Germany due to lingering shame over collaboration with the Nazi occupations. In the other Europeans, one unarticulated but obvious practice has been to make even the discussion of racism and white supremacy taboo. This is why silence is just as important as language in understanding the issue of race in European societies. For example, France, when addressing its racist past during colonialism, has preferred to talk about its civilizing mission. And current official reports on racism and xenophobia have been only about anti-Semitism and bias against North Africans. Russia has boasted about its specific constitutional provisions that outlaw discrimination on the basis of race, sex, or nationality, and even had a Soviet of nationalities during the Soviet period. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of the Netherlands reminds us of its century-old sheltering of refugees extending back to the early modern period. For example, the Jews from Spain, French Protestants, and American Pilgrim Fathers, all fleeing religious persecution. It is common in European societies to deny that they have a race problem and to accuse the United States as the main culprit in this. Even their library catalogs mainly direct us to United States history. I should point out that with regard to Russia's claims, while it is true the Soviet Constitution was the first to explicitly ban such discrimination, it is important to note that in Russia, there has always been a vast difference between the theory and the practice. Even during the Soviet period in 1932, 13 Africans and Afro-Americans studying at communist political schools met with the secretary of the executive committee of the Communist International to protest about the Soviet English-Russian dictionaries that translated nigger as nigger and darky, and the term black infant as pickaninny. At the same meeting, some complained of being spat upon and called monkeys. In all the silent European societies, a good place to trace their actual attitudes is in their dictionaries, going back centuries. Some of the European definitions derived from ancient religious and folklore associated and associating Black people with evil and devils. And some drew upon revered modern European philosophers, such as Immanuel Kant, who in one of his works said that Black Africans have no feelings or mental capacities that rise above the level of apes. With respect to the question of white supremacy, it is Eastern Europe and Russia where it has shown its rawest form. The reason such groups are most visible in Eastern Europe is that the most authoritarian governments are there. And such governments welcome movements supporting extreme nationalism, although at times they have even challenged the governments that view them as patriotic organizations. Though there are also related political parties in Western Europe, recent decades have seen tens of thousands of neo-Nazis and skinheads active further east. This has made it at times dangerous, especially for Black males, to go out in public alone, particularly on occasions that white supremacists celebrate, such as Adolf Hitler's birthday. Finally, one notable recent development regarding white supremacy in Europe that's worth watching is a possible adjustment now taking place in the hierarchical status of racial and cultural groups. In some countries, there seems to be a rather sudden, comparatively warmer embrace of Blacks in Europe in the wake of turmoil with Muslims in the recent massive wave of immigration. For example, Blacks in France, West Indian Blacks in England, and Surinamers in the Netherlands are sometimes noticing a change. But are they now more respected or just considered harmless and less threatening because of their having been shaped by European religion and language, and because of their limited economic and political power in Europe? There also seems a danger that as they become less visible, pressing needs in Black communities will be given less attention. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Blakely. Very fascinating. We will pass the baton to Isabelle Bonny-Claverie. Let me just see if I can put you on spotlight there. All right.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Andrew Clark, for your invitation. So I would like to quickly explore how French politicians have used a rhetoric, a very specific rhetoric, to counter the revendications from racial minorities. It is very striking to see that though on one hand, there's no name, there's no word to name us. For instance, me as a Black French or an African French, there's no word to define who I am, but there is a very rich vocabulary used by politicians from the left wing to the right wing to counter our revendications. And we can sum them up with three words: victimization, communitarism, and repentance. For those who are not familiar with the French context, you need to know that in France, we are supposed to be colorblind. So race should not exist and should not be a significant fact. And all identities, all social groups should merge or meld together into the Republic, the French Republic, that is supposed to unify us all. So every time that you have a racial ethnical minority trying to point inequalities experienced, let's say, by Black people as a result of the colonial politics, as a result of slavery, especially in the West Indies, where slavery was institutionalized. Politicians would say that you victimizing yourself, and they will ask you to stop victimizing yourself, which is a way to say that they have no responsibility for what happened in the past and should not be accountant of what happened. And of course, it's a way to block all the demands of reparations. And then you have communitarism, which is like a swear word in France. And it came to the point that even naming us as Black people was very difficult. Like for years, I couldn't even publicly say that I'm Black. It would have been considered as a form of yes, communitarism, separatism, which is the new word that Macron now use. And so, of course, to me, I understand it as a way to prevent any type of political organization based on race or based on an ethnical group or religious group, and this is extremely strong in the French and even among the French society, and so it's that's why I guess in France you don't have any strong Black or Arabic political leader. It's because you have no possibility to publicly express yourself and in the political field as a Black person, because you're supposed always to represent the Republic. The Republic has no color, which means somewhere that it's white, is white. But though, despite this, thanks to a new generation of scholars, a new generation of anti-racist activists coming from racial minorities, and also thanks to maybe films like mine that were quite new at the time, you have now a new, let's say, decolonial perspective, that's how it's called in France, perspective on race that is slowly spreading through society and especially in the media. And because this is seen as a new threat by politicians, I've noted that last spring, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, some anti-racist protests started in France, and President Macron, in his speech, said, okay, the Republic will not allow any form of separatism. So that's how he addressed the demands of the youth, because it was mainly young people asking for more representation, for more equality, for less racism. And he addressed it by talking about separatism. And very recently, in September, he made a speech about what the French Republic is, and he developed the concept of separatism. And it appears that this concept has been specifically forged to design Muslims in France and Arabic people in France. And because, okay, in France we have what we call secularism, separation between state and religion. And Islam is not only because of the terrorist attack, even before that, because people from North Africa are the largest racial minority, and there are most of them are Muslim or from Muslim culture. Islam is seen as the biggest threat to the French Republic, to the French society. And so now separatism is a way to say that if you affirm your religion a certain way, in a certain way, you will separate yourself from the Republic. So it's like being like an enemy from inside. And this is very questioning to me, because we see that the hate against Muslim people is so deep in France that this kind of discourse on unleash racism through the society. And then the third word that is used by all politicians is repentance. I mean that every time as a racial minority, you have a revendication, you ask to the government to be accountant of what happened, to address specific kind of inequalities, the response will be, okay, we agree that there's some kind of discriminations, we agree that there's some kind of racism, but the Republic, but France will not be repentant. We won't have any kind of self-hatred. And this is what and it's very striking, because it has been said by presidents from socialist presidents, it has been said by someone like Sarkozy, who's from the right wing, and it's always the same words: repentance, self-hatred. So it means that that France is not French politicians won't accept to be accounted of what happened in the history of France. And to me, it's a very masculine, it's a very viral vision of what France should be. Refusing to challenge oneself, refusing to admit our own mistakes. And also, it's a way to defend a certain conception of France. And when you have such a consensus, it means to me that something higher than only something political, something higher than this is defending. And what is it? And to me, it's this very rooted conception of Frenchness that was once defined by General de Gaulle, most preeminent French leader in the history, who said that in his memories, he said that French, we are above all a white European country with a Greek culture and a Christian religion. And I believe that this is what the vast majority of French people believe. And I think that this is what French politicians, even if they, of course, never say it directly, unless they are on the far right, are defending. This is this conception of Frenchness, of identity. And yes, we could call it a white form of supremacy. And the counterpart of it is that what it is asked to racial minorities, and even though the word is never used, is to assimilate themselves. And this is a doctrine that was developed at the beginning of the 20th century during colonization, mean that France wanted to assimilate the people it colonized, Asian, Arabs, Africans, but they soon realized that we were too many people, that was too many people, that they couldn't assimilate us all, or they will dissolve this very specific European French identity. So they decided that only a few number of the, let's say, the best elements from the colonies should be assimilated and into Frenchness. And I believe this is what is still asked to us. So it means that it's not possible right now in France. It's still not possible to fully exist culturally, religiously, politically as a racial minority, because you always have to separate yourself from a part of who you are to assimilate into this very strict definition of identity.
Thank you so much, Isabelle Bani-Claverie. We will now move to Avishai Mekonnen. And let me just switch the spotlight here. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Fordham University, for having me be part of this event. I really want to talk about my own experience as a child who was a refugee, or as a child as an immigrant for a different country. I have no idea my color of skin, it will affect my future life when I was left Ethiopia and as a child at 10 years old. When we end up in 1984 in a refugee camp in Sudan, it was the life changing as a part of my life. And then seeing my family, how we have no idea we can have the difficulty to become who we are as a refugee. We didn't have the right and even the language to express our life and identity. We have known nothing how to express that. How we been beat up by the police because of we are looking different. As a refugee, we don't have rights to talk or to speak. Or to survive the death and the starvation. The only things who makes me, until this day, is my father and my parents, how they fight the racism and to speak out and to have the voice to go out to get some food and then just get beat up by that. And they never have the fear to speak out and to fight our racism. But I just want to talk also after that, we reach out to Israel. That was our mission to get our freedom. We left Ethiopia because the civil war and then the existence of religions as a Jewish wasn't easy to survive. It was indifferent. It was indifferent also. We didn't have we have the life in different life as a Jewish, but and the racism we face, it just built up later on. We didn't know that we can have the racism because of skin of color, anti-Blackness. It was in different way always we face it, anti-religions, which is also we have to express ourselves who we are, how we become Jewish, and all that journey of expressing ourselves. It was very hard for me to survive in Israel, but again, the circle is in the circle of my parents, who as a Jewish stand up and fight the religions and to have equal quality. But I want to say, in my own experience of surviving in Ethiopia and Israel, it wasn't easy to fight the racism, because also you have to learn the language. I didn't have the language of my own because I left very young. I didn't have the language in Amharic, Ethiopian language. to have the voice to write it and to say to the law, I have the voice to get what I deserved as everyone equal quality and in the education and then into this job. But it always wasn't easy because of skin of color. It has to be difficulty to fight, to express yourself. If you really, are you part of Israeli society? Are you really deserve it? It wasn't easy. But what I say, the difference of Israel, um, the hardware part of it is religions, how we want to express ourselves. Really, we are equal Jewish as European Jews and everyone who came to Israel. Um, that was the difficult also. Uh, and then we fight for it. We got our rights to be part of the history of the Jews who came in North Africa or in Africa because of the religions, they deserve to be a part of like the Europeans. That's also, I mean, I can tell as a student who went to the university, I didn't get everything easy like Israeli or Europeans. Everyone have to be in a difficult way. I have to work hard to get what they get. Even if I serve in the army, I have to work twice to express I can't do it, what the other guy do it because of color of my skin. That's the experience of also the language, I think is a part of it. It has a powerful and depend how you speak out. I think my parents still today, they're facing the racism because of the language, a lack of language. So I have to be part of the expression and call up offices, listen, speak up the way they speak and they can the rights, what they deserve. What upsetted me, anti-racism, anti-blackness, it got worse and worse since I left Ethiopia in the West. It's scaring me very in a hard way, especially because I'm a father today. And I moved to United States 15 years ago. It just, I think in my part of the, as a filmmaker, I become filmmaking is how we educate the West about our culture and about ourselves, who we are and deserve the equal rights. And we have history, we have names, and that's what we survived 2,500 years, not because someone else fight for us, we fight for ourselves to survive that. That's what inspired me to be filmmaking. The power of telling to the audience what they can learn from us. The silence is the bad. I think that's the part of the things what inspired me to be filmmaking today. And the job is hard today, and the youth who lives in Israel who fight in the same way around the world to have their voice to be heard, equal like everybody. And then we have in our community, in the Ethiopian Israeli community, highest educated in the law and in every job market they want to be, but it's not easy to get that because of color of the skin. And things is changing because we fight, and we have now representative and politicians. Since I came, people really fight harder to improve themselves. And thank God, that's where we have a little bit of voice and being heard, fighting the ultra-Orthodox into today, who against our religions is not good enough. I think I spoke about that in the film in 400 Miles to Freedom, to explain the power of our existing, and the power of our religion, 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 and the po That's what it is. I think it's a part of it that if we don't have that voice to tell to the West to educate, this entire Blackness is getting very scary and ugly. And I can tell that as Israeli, also American, the language I speak is funny. And lately I find out when I go back home, the racism in the home is, if I speak Hebrew, I have less exploitation of racism. But if I switch to English, people really much better. It's funny, they really, I don't get the races, I get the service better than any other Ethiopian Israeli they get. It's funny how I find out language has a power of, because maybe Israel also is pro-America. When I speak English, it's like I think they're not part of the Israeli society, maybe someone not Ethiopian. And the other thing what makes us special there is our home. We are part of Israel, and we want to change the law to educate and people, they have to stop saying, you have to say thank you because we brought you. And it's, that's the problem. A lot of people, they think we saved by Israel, and then that's not true. We saved ourselves, like the Europeans, North Africa, Moroccans. They saved themselves to go to Israel because of civil war. Israel being part of the airlift is a part of Israel mission as a Jewish nation to save Jews. That's the problem with the stories and being told by our own point of view. We never told our history, how we survived the dangers of by dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam when he tried to wipe out everybody on Jewish and every education is never being told. So today, even the police, when they caught the Ethiopian young in the street, they don't see them, they have the power because they think they're being saved there. So they think they have the rights to tolerate. I think that's what we do today. How we fight in the racism is to go out and to educate, and also the curriculum and the text and Israel education, you have to be part of the history of the Ethiopian history. People, they can really maybe less violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Avishai. And our final speaker will be Tanya Hernandez. And let me just find you, Tanya, and so I can put the spotlight on you. What happened to Tanya? There you are. Okay. And sorry, Tanya, I'm trying to put you on spotlight, but it's not giving me that power. So maybe if you start speaking, there it goes.
Oh, okay.
All right, you should be there. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to say it is a tremendous honor to be here with this very distinguished panel. I'm always very excited to talk across disciplines and to be part of an international dialogue. So thank you to the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures for inviting me. I'm also a big fan of Isabel's. Loved the documentary, and I'm looking forward to seeing Avishai's film as well, now that I have knowledge about it. So I'm here to interject the Latin American perspective, and what is, so fascinating is how very little different there is to say. You heard Professor Bakley, you heard Isabel, you heard Avishai. I could say the same thing in Spanish and it would be about Latin America. And so I'm very grateful for the way in which Dr. Blakely situated the importance of not just language, but silence as a power dynamic. and a frame that both inhibits and makes difficult the ability to reveal discrimination and racism, and also to organize against it. So let me tell you a little bit about Latin America in 2 seconds or less. What is always interesting, I find, for a US audience in particular, is that when Latin America is raised as a context in which the issue of anti-Blackness is quite salient and prevalent, the response that I often get, at least when I talk about it, is that, oh, you know, is it a small community? Are there any Black people? I thought you all were mixed and happy. And so how is there racism, and how can you tell who's Black? Here's the thing. There is this mythology that the story and the legacy of slavery is a US story in English only. And as we know from all the other speakers, that is far from true. And in Latin America is particularly far from true, because historians document the ways in which the slave trade was primarily to the Caribbean and Latin America. So like the 3% or so of slaves that were brought to the Americas were brought to North America, right? And everybody down south got the rest. And so the African diaspora outside of Africa is in Colombia, is in Peru, is in Venezuela, is in Brazil, right? So the story, right, of anti-Blackness is a very Latin American one, although not exclusively. And I'm very grateful to have had your distinguished panel sort of illuminate that for the audience. So that being the case, how is this such a well-kept secret that only slowly but surely is starting to be heard? Well, like with these other contexts in Europe at large, in France, and in Israel, Latin America has also been very well-versed at trying to promote the idea that racism and Blackness is a US story. And it doesn't really matter anywhere else. Once upon a time, maybe South Africa, but you know, now apartheid is over. So we don't need to talk about them anymore. Racism, that's the US. And I'm not here to let the US off the hook, but I am here to say that whether you want to point to the fact, as many people do, that Latin America has so many different terms for people's skin color. So how can this be an example of a context that is very steeped in anti-Blackness, you know, equating the fluidity of different terms for skin color, coffee with a little bit of milk and 2 lumps of sugar, as opposed to just saying Black, that it can coexist. And if anything, is a very strong tool for keeping Black people down. Why? Back again to this theme of silence. You take away the ability to have a language, a grammar for talking about racism and identifying Blackness, then you completely take away the ability then to make it visible and to fight against it. In Latin America, this is also, and you know, put my lawyer hat on for a second, has also very much affected how law has been able to respond. And so my research is all about the ways in which of sort of illuminating this historical project, but also showing, oh, there's my timer, perfect timing, the way in which the present day is filled with people who are fighting the good fight. Isabel will talk about it in France, and it's happening in Latin America as well. And with that fight, there is the pushback. So the French politicians are not alone in deploying themes of colorblindness and separatism. And if you talk about race, you're the racist. These tools are ones that are also used in Latin America. So I think with that, you've got a little bit of a teaser for what the Latin American context and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean can offer up with regards to anti-Blackness. And I'm looking forward to the conversation across the panel and any questions we might be able to take from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Hernandez. We, as often happens on Zoom, things take a lot longer than we desire, and so we don't have a tremendous amount of time left. So I think I actually would like to try to turn to the students if possible, because they have taken time out to be here, and I would really like their input here. So if any students have any questions, any comments that they would like to make, please put up a blue hand. And if not, if you don't want to speak in person, you can also try to put something through the chat. But if you raise a blue hand right now, we'll try to get your question in as quickly as possible.
We have a question by Anne Weston.
Okay. And Alessia, can you make it so Anne can ask the question?
I just asked her.
Hi, yeah. I wanted to ask, one thing I noticed was missing is like Asian perspective of anti-Blackness. So I was just kind of wondering about that and if that was something like any of you could discuss.
Do any of the panelists want to attack that question? We actually wanted to bring in someone on Asia as well, but it just wasn't possible to get another speaker. But I don't know if any of the panelists have a knowledge of what's taking place in Asia and whether the same types of silence, pushing aside as that has been described here is also operative.
I can chime in for just 2 seconds, Tanya here, to say that the conversation about racism generally, let alone anti-Blackness, is a much more muted one in Asia. It often gets sort of distracted over into talking about ethnicity and the nationalism of each of these nation states. And there's an interesting dynamic as well, similar in respect to the way Abhishek described, the role of language, a Fanonian moment of where you use a different language and in another context, it's viewed as exotic. So that traveling through Asia, and I can speak to this directly, I don't catch the same kind of heat as would a minoritized group within each of those nation states, because it's sort of like, oh, you're just passing through, you're a tourist. That means you have some money to be able to be here, you're speaking in English, okay, not so bad, not such a bad Black. And so courtesy is extended towards me. Let me try to settle down and marry somebody native, I think we'd be looking at a very different kind of situation. And there are other scholars who do that work. Throw search terms into Google Scholar. You will find a rich literature.
Thank you, Anne.
Can I be heard?
Of course.
I don't know how to raise my hand.
I apologize. You can just, if you raise it, we'll make sure you can speak.
The reason I've been quiet about this is that most of my knowledge is anecdotal, but I have for decades now followed developments in China in particular, and to some extent in Japan. And I can tell you without hesitation that there are very similar problems in those countries as well. And needless to say, in India, with the millennia of the caste system, you know that there's some common patterns. But with respect to China, what I've noticed in recent years is the growing number of Africans who have gone to China, and some have prospered in China. But predictably, if you just Google Africans in Asia and Africans in China, you will get more links than you want about racism and other kinds of public reaction to their presence. And you'll also get positive accounts from some Africans about their experiences. So we're really talking about a universal problem. It just has different shades in different settings.
Thank you, Anne. We have a question from the chat, and it's from Prabhur Kaur, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name. My question is to the filmmakers. I'm curious as to know how you have used media as a tool to educate your audience on anti-Blackness and to start a necessary dialogue.
Well, if I may answer this, I wouldn't say a tool to educate people, because I don't think that you make a film for this purpose. Me, when I make a film, first of all, is to tell a story. And I wanted to tell a story from my point of view and try through the film I made to answer the very questions I had myself and couldn't find any answer, because this was not talked about, and there was a big silence, as was said before, and I had the chance that for some reasons I can't really explain why, it was easy to make. It was easily produced, and it was broadcasted on main channel in France. And after my film aired, I realized that it was probably the first time in France that a Black filmmaker was addressing these issues on a big broadcast, and people, Black people, really linked to the film and felt that their story was told from their own point of view. But it really shows from how late we are, because I made this film 5 years ago, and it was shown again during a lockdown, so during last spring, and the reactions were, and people were saying, okay, it's still so accurate. So it shows how difficult it is to make changes, to really change the society when it comes to Blackness.
Right. I would love to add a little bit, if I can.
Sure, go ahead.
I really I have the example, Isabel, what she said. Really, the voice of Blackness, and as a filmmaker, it's not just to educate, it's just telling your own voice to express to people to understand you. Especially today in Israel, the media is white. It's no any diverse. Particularly we're talking about news or theaters, is about white. It's about, we have to have the diversity to our own children, also to be similar. And any Black kids, they need to have the role model in the media, on the story, on the news, or actors. It's a very part of the, as in my own filmmaking, today maybe is a lot of the filmmakers, Ethiopian Israelis. Back then, it was very hard even to get the audience to speak. Is somewhere when we came to Israel, always someone spoke for us to tell how we came, how we survived. We have never told in our voice who we are and how we survive. And I think this is part of the expression of also in the policing. We need to tell in our own voice to fight the to explain about ourselves. That's a really a good point. What Elizabeth she said.
Thank you. So we have more blue hand. Oh, sorry. Did you
go ahead, Alicia? Go ahead.
We have one more blue hand. It's Braulio Mourão. Sorry if the name is mispronounced. I just asked you to unmute, and you should do. Braulio, were you able to unmute?
Okay, yeah, sorry. So Professor Hernandez, I thought
you kind of opened my mind, like you kind of blew my mind a bit, because I'm an international student. I'm from Lima, Peru. And the focus on like the talk of racism has always been like mixed people versus white versus like those who have like are native. And I can't recall from my education ever talking about like people from African descent. And we know that we had slaves, and there's like this particular name that we gave them, but I don't know, I can't recall what happened to them, or after, like how they integrate into society from that. And I know that there's an African Peruvian group, but we don't talk about racism at all regarding those people. So it's a really interesting point of view. And thank you, Professor Hernandez.
Thank you. In fact, one of the people I collaborate is an Afro-Peruvian lawyer by the name of Mariela Noles Cotito. So Google her, you will find her. She's also a journalist as well and a law professor in Peru. And she's part of a growing number of activists who are trying to sort of raise up and illuminate these issues within the Peruvian context. You know, every place has got the people on the front lines trying to fight the good fight and to help educate, because some people just are literally ignorant because our school systems have failed us all globally on the issues of race and racism.
Thank you. We have one more student requesting a question. This will be Patrick Sweeney. Are you there?
Yes, hello, thank you.
There you go.
My question was if any of the panelists have practical recommendations for Fordham students to combat anti-Blackness.
Any?
I don't want to dominate, so I'll give my panelists space. But as the Fordham law professor on the, on the panel, I figure it would be remiss if I didn't say 2 cents on this at least. You know, the thing is our younger generation, it's really quite exciting to see the political activism and engagement. And what I would like very much is to not lose this moment that the nation state is somewhat focused on George Floyd and others, although poor George Floyd was, you know, one of many, 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 many victims of anti-Blackness. And so what I hope that you will do, regardless of what happens at the end of the tally of our election, is that we keep at it, right? Because the typical backlash, and we can see this from a comparative perspective across all these various jurisdictions. There's like a little moment sometimes where some talk can happen about Blackness, and then the immediate backlash is, okay, we've talked about this enough. Right? The 2 minutes we've spent on it, oh my God, what are we gonna talk about this forever? And so what we need is for the young people to not lose sight of how important it is to continue to examine all of this and to try to combat it. It's the fatigue, it's the discomfort that often has people take their eyes off the ball. And so we need you to hold all the rest of us accountable.
I received a question through the chat. So I don't know if I have time to answer it. It's about... Well,
just 1 second, just on that question, because I think Allison wanted to go in. I apologize, I was muted and I was trying to get his waving hand. Allison, and then we can go back to you, Isabel.
Yes, I just wanted to say that my response to that question is not very original in concept, but what I've discovered is that a lot of the problem actually does reside in ignorance. When I look at my experience in Europe, what I've discovered is that the absence of this kind of history in their school curricula from the lowest grades on up through the university has been a problem. And so one thing that I think is a positive development is that there's more openness in these societies now to actually incorporate that kind of basic information into their learning systems. And I have optimism that, that can make a difference. And in fact, maybe the best evidence of that is a recent proposal by our leader, who won't be named on this, in the White House, who especially wants to restructure the school curriculum. He's right in thinking that if you keep telling real history, that certain kinds of things are going to happen. And so he wants to have that removed from the history book, because he says that's un-American, what's in there now.
That's great.
Yeah. If I may add something to what Professor Blakely said, in France, I wouldn't say that there's more space in the educational system, and especially in universities, for Black studies or things like that. It's just that I think there's a new generation of scholars, there's a new generation of activists, and are pushing for it. And the backlash is constant. And even very recently, the Minister of Education said that French universities were infiltrated by Islamo-leftists. So it means that there's really a big resistance. But the difference is that decades before, Black people used to keep silent because they were not in a position where they could speak. They were too dominated socially, economically, etc. And now you have this generation of Black French people who have access to education and who don't want to remain silent, no longer silent. They don't want this. And so it's a struggle, and it's a constant struggle. And it's due to the courage of a few people that things are slowly changing, and that, yes, new concepts are spreading through the society. And even if they are combated, even if they are criticized, well, I hope that they will slowly change minds. And just to answer the question that was on the chat, it was about if there was some kind of tokenism about Black filmmakers in France. No, there's no. And the number of Black filmmakers in France is so small that no, there's no tokenism at all, not in this field. It's just people fighting to express themselves and to exist in some way, to survive.
Thank you, Isabel. There's a question for Professor Blakely from Nicholas Scotchy. Again, if I butchered your name, I apologize. You mentioned instances of anti-Black racism in the Soviet Russia and within Russian language and politics. One theme of Soviet propaganda during the Cold War was to utilize the United States issues regarding racism and segregation to show the superiority of the Soviet Union. Do you think this propaganda was as much about drawing attention away from racism in the Soviet Union as it was about portraying the United States as racist and an anti-Black nation? Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question completely, but the Soviet Union found American racial relations a gift. And the easiest target for anti-American propaganda they could have dreamed of. And what they were mainly aiming to do was capture the leadership of the emerging independent African states as colonialism was coming to an end from the end of the 50s forward. And so from that period on, up until the 80s, over 50,000 African students were brought to Russia in order to attempt to capture that leadership. And there were some actual successes if you go to the list of some of the leaders of African countries. But for the most part, it failed. And the main point I would make is that the vast majority of those Africans encountered horrendous racism. And so, although some of them got valuable educations, their goal in life was to get further west in Europe or to the United States, or in some instances, they returned home. But things were in so much turmoil in Africa that further west was more attractive. But the propaganda was just a pragmatic kind of mechanism.
Thank you, Hassan. We are already 12 minutes over. I think there's enough interest and questions here to go on for the rest of the afternoon, but I know that our guests are very busy and in some cases have already been here an hour longer than they thought they were going to be. I would like to give a great applause to all of them. It's fantastic to hear their positions and their knowledge. And I think the ongoing message from here is that silence has created this history, and the only way to change this history is to move away from this silence. So thank you for your articulate interventions to move us beyond silence. And we thank you once again for being here at Fordham. And thanks to all the students and faculty and public who showed up. Next week on November 4th, we have our next panel on exploding the gender binary at the same time. So we look forward to having many of you back. Thank you again. Thanks again to all of our speakers.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.